A man in protective gear walked through the snow and ice. Looking around, he saw only stiff corpses everywhere. A blizzard had taken away more than half of the world's life. Unexpectedly, this was only the first wave of attacks launched by the mysterious race on Earth. The survivors would face even harsher challenges. A few girls were on a small boat on vacation. While they were raising their glasses to celebrate, the shore behind them suddenly became dark. Immediately after, a bright blue light fell from the sky. The girls had never seen such a strange sight before. While they were in amazement, a strong wind suddenly rose from the sea. One of them rushed to the cockpit and discovered that the electronic equipment had failed. Immediately after, the two friends outside suddenly fell to the ground. The girl was trembling with fear. She looked out the window and saw a snowflake falling from the sky. On a street in Argentina, a large number of residents blocked the road to protest the fact that the power company had not restored power to their homes. This situation had lasted for 3 days. Everyone was extremely angry. The police were also helpless in this matter, so they could only turn back passing vehicles. Sitting in the car, Juan laughed and shook his head. He was planning to go to his friend's house to gather. Now he could only take a detour. When he passed another intersection, he happened to see many fire trucks with sirens blaring. This made Juan feel that something was wrong. When he arrived at his best friend's house, Juan learned that a nearby transformer station was on fire. Importantly, there was also an asbestos factory nearby. This thing would create extremely strong poison when it burned. Putting aside his worries, Juan and his friends played cards. The four of them had been close friends for more than 30 years. And were very familiar with each other. Only the young man who joined in the middle seemed a little lost. He looked left and right, and he even found a cat mask that the homeowner had hidden. A few people were having fun when the lights on their feet suddenly went out. Unexpectedly, there was a power outage here too. However, the strangest thing was still behind. Everyone's cell phones were automatically turned off. Loud noises kept coming from outside the house. At this time, the female homeowner ran downstairs. She looked out the window and saw the garage guard suddenly fall down. The male homeowner was preparing to go out and take a look, but Juan discovered something unusual. Outside the window, there were many small particles floating around. It felt like snow was falling, but it was clearly summer now. The homeowner suddenly remembered the news earlier. Could it be that the asbestos dust from the transformer station fire was released? Perhaps the garage guard was poisoned by inhaling asbestos. Now no one dared to risk going out to save people. Suddenly, a car lost control and crashed into the curb. Everyone felt a sense of foreboding. They wanted to call their relatives to ask about the situation. Unfortunately, all the cell phones were turned off. Even the landline phones could not be used. Fortunately, the homeowner still had some sense. He told everyone to close all the doors and windows, absolutely not letting the toxic particles fly in. Juan put his hand on the window and felt the cold in his palm. It turned out that it was really snowing outside. They had never encountered such a situation. It was snowing in the summer. Moreover, the snowflakes also carried extremely strong poison. The more the silver-haired man thought about it, the more confused he became. He was very worried about the safety of his family, so he found a coat to cover his head. Despite everyone's tension, he still resolutely went out. Everyone looked out the window nervously. They only saw that the silver-haired man had not taken a few steps before collapsing to the ground. Witnessing the destructive power of the snowfall, everyone could no longer calm down. Only after a while did they accept the fact that a disaster had struck. The entire city was gradually covered in a layer of white snow. There was no doubt that everyone walking on the street had met with an accident. Suddenly, a continuous knocking sound came from the basement. Everyone took out their oil lamps and went down to check. It turned out that someone was calling for help outside the door. The homeowner said that this door led to the garage and was not used much. He couldn't even find the key. Everyone discussed for a while and finally decided to pry open the door to save the person. The woman who entered was a delivery person. Her bicycle had broken down and she was about to go into the garage to get it fixed before leaving, but she saw the garage guard collapsed in the snow. After Juan heard this, an idea suddenly came to his mind. He walked straight out the wooden door, through a small path, and arrived at the parking lot. Juan's car was parked not far away. However, the car keys were left in the security room. The middle of the road was covered in snow because the roof was broken. The homeowner advised him not to take the risk. But Juan thought of the girl behind the line. She was wearing a hat and a raincoat. Juan said that as long as the snow didn't touch her skin, it would be fine. Juan was also worried about his family's safety, so he decided to take the risk. With the help of a few people, a truck was pushed to the door of the security room. Juan sat in the driver's seat and brought out an iron ladder. He covered his head with a plastic bag and successfully climbed the iron ladder into the security room. Juan took out all the car keys of him and his best friend. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. After all, such a big disaster had happened, so no one wanted to be stuck in someone else's house. But when Juan inserted the key and prepared to start the engine, he found that the car didn't react at all. Only then did everyone realize that the power outage and phone shutdown earlier were not accidental. The city must have been hit by a large-scale electromagnetic attack. It caused all electronic devices to fail. It seemed that the situation was more serious than they thought. The only thing that could create such a huge destructive force other than a solar storm was an atomic bomb explosion. At this time, the homeowners saw the lights on in the house across the street. An old man was standing by the window. He was very worried that the other party would open the window, so he tried his best to signal to remind them. But the result was the opposite. His actions aroused the other party's curiosity. The old man opened the window in confusion and collapsed immediately. Not long after, his wife came to see the result of the couple collapsing in the snow. Looking at the sky gradually brightening, Juan's face became more and more gloomy because he had a habit of covering himself in the morning. Thinking of this, Juan planned to go home immediately. His close friends naturally could not let him go to his death. Seeing Juan's resolute attitude, the landlord prepared to make a protective suit. His house just happened to have waterproof clothes and gas masks. Everyone helped Juan put on all the protective equipment to make sure that not a single piece of skin was exposed. Juan tried on the mask and could breathe freely, so he put on his backpack and went outside. Under everyone's expectant eyes, Juan took a deep breath and stepped on the snow. A snowflake falling from the sky seemed to have no effect on him. This homemade protective suit seemed to be very effective. It was just that the horrible scene on the street that Juan had imagined. He could see the color of death with almost every step. Thinking of the entire city like a giant cemetery, Juan couldn't help but shiver. How many lives had this flower carpet taken? Because it appeared so suddenly, the people who were outside at that time didn't even have a chance to escape. The temperature in the air was getting lower and lower, and Juan's body began to feel uncomfortable. He always felt like someone was watching him from behind. He ran a few steps quickly to warm up his body. The hallucination caused by the low temperature finally disappeared. Juan took out the map and prepared to take a shortcut to his daughter's place. He passed through the waiting hall of the station and then walked on the long train track. However, the scene before his eyes made Juan's blood run cold. A train stopped in the middle of the track, surrounded by corpses of passengers. It must have been a poisonous snowstorm that fell from the sky when the train was about to enter the station. Juan continued to move forward. Suddenly, a train made a noise. Unexpectedly, there were quite a few survivors hiding inside. When they saw Juan approaching, they thought he was a peacekeeper coming to rescue them. After all, they had been stuck here for 6 hours. Don't even mention food. He couldn't even take a sip of water. Juan shook his head helplessly. He was afraid that he couldn't save these people. The only thing he could do was take out a large bottle of mineral water from his backpack. As for their life and death, it could only depend on their fate. After crossing the railway, Juan quickly arrived at his wife's building. Because the two had been separated for many years, his daughter had always lived with his wife. When he entered the stairs, Juan took off his protective mask. Water kept running on the stairs. Several survivors were standing at the door. It seemed like they were trying to pry open the door. When he reached his wife's floor, Juan saw several people standing at the door praying. He didn't pay attention and went straight into his wife's house. He searched several rooms in a row, but he didn't see his wife and daughter at home. A strong sense of unease rose in Juan's heart. At this moment, there was a noise outside the living room. He thought the house was being robbed. After asking, Juan learned that his wife had told him to go get medicine. Juan's eyes stopped. The back of his hand was covered with snow on his clothes. Just when he thought he was about to die, his wife walked through the crowd and came. She chased all the unrelated people out the door. Then she told him about their daughter's news. Last night, their daughter went to friend's house and still hadn't returned. Juan was so worried that he was going crazy, but this wasn't the worst thing. His wife didn't even know the address of her daughter's friend's house. Juan tried to calm him down. Now was not the time to blame each other. He was going to his daughter's school. There must be a record of all the students' addresses. Juan opened the door and found a large number of residents standing at the door. In addition, the news that he could resist the poison of the snow had spread. Some people guessed that Juan had a way to prevent the poison. Juan explained that he was only using a gas mask and that the snowflakes would lose their toxicity when they fell on him. At this time, a bald man stepped forward and asked Juan to take off his mask because a resident of this building had committed suicide in the bathtub due to despair. But this flushing had almost wasted exploited all the fresh water reserves in the building. Now these people could only rely on Juan's mask. Thanks to that, they could go to the supermarket to get more water. The fake Juan agreed. As a result, he slowly took out a pistol. He was still relying on the mask to find his daughter, so he couldn't help them. But unexpectedly, the bald man was also a tough character. From somewhere, this man took out a pistol and continuously pulled the trigger to shoot downstairs. Juan had no choice but to fight back. However, their shots were not very accurate. Juan took his wife to hide in an apartment and used the wardrobe to block the door. Juan led his wife to find a waterproof suit. He saw the car under the balcony, and this idea came to mind. Waiting for his wife to get the waterproof jacket, he put the copper mask on her head. Now there was only one person who could escape. Juan told his wife to go find her daughter first. After hanging along the window and jumping off the roof of the car, his wife successfully escaped from the apartment building. The bald guy outside wanted to rush in. Juan occasionally fired a few shots, scaring them and making them not dare to stop. However, the bald guy was not an easy person. He calculated when Juan ran out of bullets. He immediately led everyone to rush in. However, Juan was already prepared. He held a plastic bag in his left hand and a wooden stick in his right hand. Under everyone's astonished eyes, Juan forcefully broke the balcony glass. The bald guy and his accomplices immediately ran away. As for Juan, under the protection of the plastic bag covering his head, he was not harmed by the poison of the rain and snow. He picked up his backpack and jumped down immediately. The vigorous movement made him almost unable to breathe. Juan only felt that his breathing was getting more and more difficult. He had only taken a few steps before collapsing onto the snow. In his daze, he seemed to be in another place. When he woke up again, Juan found himself in a car. Next to him sat a few survivors wearing protective gear. When the other party took off their masks, Juan realized that they were the wives of his close friends. It turned out that this was also a coincidence. The morning after Juan left, a few close friends were preparing to rest. The female host wanted to get tap water to make tea, but her husband stopped her. He insisted on checking to see if the tap water was contaminated by the poison in the snow. For safety, they should only drink bottled mineral water. However, the amount of storage in the landlord's house was limited, only enough for a few days at most. Everyone had faith in Juan. As long as he returned in time to wear protective gear, he could go to the convenience store to collect fresh food. It had to be said that the landlord's sense of safety was very high. Since he was free anyway, he resolutely went out to secure all the doors and windows. After all, in an apocalyptic world, all kinds of people could appear. The delivery girl saw the landlord's weapon and intended to take it for a try. As a result, the landlord, who was on high alert, immediately reminded her. Her attitude was like she was guarding against thieves. The delivery girl felt uncomfortable. She didn't want to stay any longer. She was about to put on her helmet and leave. The landlord, Favali, quickly stepped forward to stop her. He was just being cautious, but he didn't want to see others seek death. Favali decided to help the delivery girl fix the bike. Maybe he could help her get home more safely. As a result, when Favali repaired the bike, he unexpectedly discovered that the bike lights could still light up. It turned out that only the LED lights were broken. The old-fashioned incandescent bulbs could still be used. A bold idea came to Favali's mind. He used a record player to connect the wires to the battery. In a short while, a melodious song was heard. Favali then realized that the electromagnetic attack only affected the integrated circuit. The old-fashioned electrical equipment could still function normally. It just so happened that his house also had an antique car. After successfully starting it, they immediately went to the fire station and equipped each person with a protective suit. At this time, gunshots were heard from afar. They guessed that Juan might be in trouble. Turning a corner, they happened to meet Juan's wife. Then they also successfully rescued Juan, who was unconscious. As a group of people walked through the dead streets, they did not notice several fireballs falling from the sky. Could it be that a new disaster was about to descend? Adult insect monsters were attacking the survivors. They were the size of bulls. Their hard shells shone metallically on the snow. The humans in the melee had almost no resistance. They all became a source of food for the monsters. At this time, Juan's group did not know that a bigger disaster was about to descend. After leaving Juan's wife's apartment, they returned to Favali's house. Favali used the radio to call for help, but he searched all the frequencies and no one answered. Lucas suggested that they should flee the city, but the problem was that they did not know if other places were safe. Moreover, Juan had an important unfinished mission, finding his daughter. Juan wanted to drive Favali's old car, But Favali thought for a moment and then refused, because the car was the only survival tool for everyone. Juan had no choice but to walk with his wife to his daughter's school. At this time, the snowstorm still showed no signs of stopping. Favali's worries finally came true. The remaining survivors began to abandon their moral struggles. In the night, the occasional sound of broken glass, sometimes cars, and a few gunshots. Juan and his wife, after a difficult night of walking, finally arrived at their daughter's school. The two split into two groups. Juan continued to look for transportation. Juan's wife, Elena, went to look for the address of their daughter's classmate. When Juan entered the school's security room, something unbelievable happened. Strange images suddenly appeared in Juan's mind. He saw his daughter sleeping and the bell tower on fire. The next second, Juan woke up in a car. He tried the key again. Miraculously, the car started. On the other side, Elena had already entered the school's road-like building. On the empty school grounds, several corpses were scattered. The scattered wine bottles showed that they were celebrating before they died. Elena let out a breath and suddenly heard a loud noise from deep in the hallway. She followed the noise from the end to the front of a locked bathroom. Through the crack in the door, Elena saw a pair of red, bloodshot eyes. Immediately after that, an angry scream rang out from inside. At this moment, Juan ran over. He released the unlucky child and gave him a slap, which calmed him down. After Juan asked what had happened, Juan knew that Pablo had been locked in the bathroom by his malicious friends for 2 days. Juan kindly reminded them that they were afraid that the other friends wouldn't come to open the door because they were all dead. Pablo rushed out of the bathroom and looked through the window to see his classmates freezing to death. His body was shaking non-stop. Elena took out her daughter's photo, and Pablo was stunned for a moment. It was only when they asked about Elena's daughter's classmate that Pablo's eyes lit up. It was Luna Stefano, her brother, who had cruelly locked him up. Juan and his wife immediately felt a spark of hope and hurriedly asked for Luna's home address. Pablo suddenly made a condition. The boy could take the two of them to Luna's house. Then they had to take him home. Juan had no choice but to agree to this request. Under Pablo's guidance, they quickly arrived at Luna's house. Juan and his wife got out of the car in protective clothing and knocked on the door, but no one answered. He directly kicked the door open with his feet. A deadly silence enveloped the entire house. The two carefully walked straight through the living room. They saw several corpses sitting around the dining table in the backyard. Juan's heavy footsteps slowly lifted a girl's head. After realizing that it wasn't his daughter, he breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, Pablo's terrified scream rang out behind him. It turned out that all the dead were the boy's family and neighbors. After forcing Pablo into the car, Juan was furious. Obviously, the boy was lying. It wasn't Luna's house, but his own. But Elena had no intention of abandoning Pablo. Imagine if their daughter met a kind person. She wouldn't want her daughter to be abandoned. Juan sighed and said nothing more. Pablo was having a fever at the moment. They passed by a pharmacy, so they decided to go in to find some fever-reducing medicine. They gave the unconscious Pablo some medicine. Outside the pharmacy, there was a loud knock on the door. Through the glass, they saw a pregnant woman calling for help. Elena felt compassion. Elena didn't hesitate to open the door and let her in. Immediately after, the pregnant woman suddenly stood up straight. Her accomplice also walked in from the side door. The black muzzle of the gun was pointed at Juan and his wife. The two robbers locked them in the pharmacy restroom. Then the two robbers took all their belongings into their car keys. Fortunately, Pablo, who was in a coma, was not discovered. When the robbers drove away, Pablo unlocked the door and rescued the couple. There was no car, so they had to walk. When they passed the train station, Juan suddenly stopped. The bodies that had been lying on the snow had all disappeared. Only a bunch of messy belongings were left. What was even more terrifying was that the wire fence outside had been torn open by something. Juan was filled with doubt. Along the wire, they found the train from yesterday. The survivors in the train and the bodies had all disappeared. The red letters on the window proved that Juan was not mistaken. He could hardly imagine what had happened here. The man suddenly felt a chill down his spine because the deformed chairs and railings were definitely not caused by human power. Not long after, the three returned to Favali's house. Knowing that his best friend was about to leave, Juan couldn't help but ask curiously. Juan asked Favali, didn't he plan to wait for relief here? Favali immediately said that he had received a radio signal from Brazil earlier. There was also a snowstorm there, accompanied by deadly poison. It was clear that this disaster had covered most of the country. They definitely couldn't wait for relief in a short time. And the reason why Favali was determined was that the Earth's magnetic field had disappeared. This theoretical storm was clearly much more serious than imagined. Favali had a property on a small island in the middle of the sea. He decided to take everyone there for shelter. But Joan didn't plan to go with Favali. No matter what, he had to find his daughter first before thinking about what to do next. Not knowing when night had fallen, the couple who had just hijacked Joan's car went to a gas station. The man cursed and got out to fill up the tank. Suddenly he heard a rustling sound behind the oil tank. He raised his flashlight and looked at it. A dark shadow appeared in the light. The woman in the car heard the noise from afar and thought it was her boyfriend's prank. Unexpectedly, the car was attacked violently next. After sinking a long distance in the snow, the car rolled straight down the ravine. Early the next morning, the Favali group was preparing supplies to go to the island. Juan had set off alone to find her daughter. He had looked up Luna's address in the phone book. Whether his daughter was alive or dead, he had to see for himself. Suddenly, a car drove up from behind. The driver was Favali. He did not want to let down their 38 years of friendship in the snowstorm. Favali decided to help Juan find his daughter, and together they went to the small island. As an applied physics expert, Favali found out the cause of this deadly poisonous snowstorm. The magnetic field at the two poles is like an invisible shield. It blocks the radioactive particles that surround the Earth from the outside. Now that the magnetic field has disappeared, the radioactive particles will stick to the surface of the snowflakes, creating a deadly threat. The two of them talked as they drove, and soon the car stopped. They only saw a large number of abandoned cars piled up under the overpass. The road into the city was completely blocked. The two of them stood there in shock for a long time. This was clearly not something humans could do. Juan saw a car in the rubble with its lights on. He was about to climb over to take a look when suddenly several military vehicles loaded with soldiers drove up. Juan and Favali curiously went up. A soldier said that the Campo camp established by the government was providing relief everywhere. They advised the two to go home and not to wander around. Juan had many doubts. He immediately called Favali to follow him quickly. He wanted to see what the retreating army was doing. After passing through a tunnel, the soldiers stopped again. Juan wanted to get a little closer, but the soldiers suddenly opened fire. Favali quickly retreated, but the cars on the overpass moved naturally. In addition, the target of the soldiers' attack was not Juan and Favali. The next second, their car was hit hard and flipped over to the roadside repair shop. The giant insects finally showed their terrifying faces. With their hard shells, they quickly rushed to the soldiers' side. They did not use blades to kill them, but rolled them up. On the other side, Juan and Favali quickly climbed to the roof of the repair shop. At this time, their hearts were still pounding. Although Juan had prepared himself mentally, he was still frightened by this monster. Only when the fighting outside had completely disappeared did the two of them dare to come out. There was not a single living person on the road. Not even a corpse could be found. They picked up a rifle and walked along the icy road. In the center of the city square, they saw quite a few giant black cocoons. At this moment, a noise came from afar. Juan hid in the corner between the buildings. He saw a giant insect dragging a corpse into a cave hidden under the snow. The two of them took a deep breath. They both thought they had to escape from this area as soon as possible. But suddenly Favali tripped over a piece of metal and hit an oil tank on the side of the road. A noise came from the cave. The giant insect rushed out as fast as lightning. Juan kept firing, but the monster did not slow down. It was getting closer and closer to them. He focused his attention and fired a shot that was close to the monster's head, but the shot hit the unprotected part of its head. However, before the two could celebrate, the ground beneath their feet began to shake violently. A large number of giant insects rushed towards them. In his despair, Juan saw someone waving. Fortunately, not all of the giant insects were chasing them. Most of them started fighting over the flesh of the insect that had just been shot. Juan and Favali ran like crazy, following the footprints in the snow to the front of the church bell tower. In front of them was a heavy door. Just as they were in despair, a bottle of flammable gasoline fell from above. The burning fire stopped the attack of the insects. Juan and Favali followed the instructions from the side door and entered the bell tower. Then they went up the spiral staircase. They quickly reached the secret room on the top floor of the bell tower. There were quite a few survivors here. The leader was a crippled man who looked very familiar. Juan always felt like he had seen this person somewhere. He was very curious about where those giant insects came from. An old man pointed to the sky and told Juan to go up and see. Juan climbed the stairs to the top of the clock tower. His eyes immediately stopped. He could only see countless fireballs like shooting stars piercing through the clouds. Each point of landing was a nest of insects. Only then did Juan understand that this seemingly natural disaster was actually a carefully planned attack by alien invaders. The purpose was to clear the way for the insect army to land. Juan stood alone on the top of the bell tower at night. Occasionally, red shooting stars would flash by, reflecting in his bloodshot eyes. Juan knew that every time that morning appeared, the hope of his daughter's survival was even slimmer. He began to persuade the survivors here to leave quickly. Those insects were climbing baskets. Sooner or later they would attack here. Everyone actually understood this principle. However, the leading man had a missing leg and was not suitable for moving. In the end, under Juan's persuasion, the one-legged man asked the other survivors to leave. He stayed to guard the tower. After arranging the supplies, the group took advantage of the darkness to carefully walk through the streets. Those monsters seemed to sleep sometimes. As long as they did not make a loud noise, they could pass through safely. Juan mentioned Campo de Mayo to everyone. They were preparing to go there to meet up with the army. When they reached the place where the overpass was blocked by cars, one of them took out a hammer and began to chisel the wall. He knew that there was an abandoned passageway that could lead straight to the other side of the overpass. As the night gradually turned white, Juan became more and more anxious. Fortunately, the mysterious tunnel had been opened. People entered one by one, but those insects also came out to find food. Juan was stuck in the bus because he was taking care of a mother and child. He could clearly see the giant insects walking a few meters away. One of them suddenly stopped and slowly walked towards the top of the bus. At the crucial moment, the sound of a bell rang everywhere. It turned out that the crippled man who had stayed in the tower was frantically ringing the bell. All the giant insects immediately changed direction like a tide and rushed towards the bell tower. Juan in the bus breathed a sigh of relief. He and the other survivors passed through the tunnel smoothly. Before entering the city, Juan had seen a car that could start in the ruins. Now it was extremely useful. On the other side, the swarm of insects had already entered the bell tower. The crippled man and his comrades had poured fuel everywhere. Seeing these hateful insects, he gently tossed a burning cigarette into the air. At the same time, Juan and the others pushed the still usable cart down, but the noise attracted another swarm of giant insects. Juan held his gun and shot while protecting the survivors on the cart. However, the more he shot, the more tall insects appeared. The giant billboard slid down from the bridge like a bugle attack. Fortunately, the cart started up and they left the insects far behind. Confirming that they had escaped danger, everyone couldn't help but cheer. But when they saw the burning bell tower, they immediately fell silent. They knew that the old man had sacrificed himself to save all their friends. Juan suddenly felt that this scene was a bit familiar. The illusion in his mind appeared again. He suddenly realized that perhaps the Campo de Mayo camp established by the army contained a greater danger. Juan and the others had successfully broken through the insect blockade. The other survivors were preparing to go to Campo de Mayo to meet the army, but Juan had to go find his daughter now, so he could not go with them. When he returned to the Favali house, Juan found that there were guards there. They must have also discovered the existence of the insects. As soon as Juan arrived at the Favali house, everyone urged him to go and see. When he approached the sofa, Juan opened his eyes in surprise. His daughter was sleeping soundly in his wife's arms. He worriedly stroked his daughter's face. He asked his wife how she found their daughter. Elena's eyes were filled with tears. It was not she who found her daughter, but her daughter who found her. Now that everyone was present, Favali decided to take everyone to the small island in the sea. However, they only had one car, so there was definitely not enough space for so many people. When everyone was at a standstill, a neighbor came over. He had originally come to recruit Favali to join the militia. Most of the survivors on this street were ready to fight the insects to protect their families. However, after hearing that Favali was planning to leave, the generous neighbor said that he could provide an old RV, but Favali had to give up his house and garage as a temporary base for the resistance. Although Favali was reluctant, he knew that staying here would only mean waiting for death. In the end, he still agreed to this deal. Early in the morning, he and everyone else arranging supplies. Then they got into 2 cars and headed towards the island. The neighbors along the way sent their best wishes, but they didn't know that they were about to face a disaster. Favali had planned the route in advance. After reaching the port, they would change to the waterway. But when they reached the nearest port, the sight before their eyes made everyone's mood fall into an ice cave. The deep sea had completely dried up. Countless abandoned toys were stuck in the cold mud. A poor fisherman remained in the same sitting position. In the water tank next to him, a small fish was still swimming around. Lucas, with a pale face, said that the sudden retreat of the seawater signaled the coming of a terrible tsunami. Everyone felt that this was not an exaggeration, so they immediately turned around, as if they could no longer go to the island. Their only choice left was Campo de Mayo. Along both sides of the road, Countless abandoned cars were like giant steel dragons stretching to the horizon. Suddenly, a plume of black smoke in front of them alerted everyone. As they got closer, they found that it was an overturned car. The driver's helmet had obvious bullet holes. It seemed that this was not caused by insects, but by someone pointing it at their own kind. Juan's child was Clara. Although she had returned safely, Clara was acting very strangely. She didn't even remember how she found her mother. Elena thought that Clara was too tired. Maybe she would be fine after a while. They had just passed a large supermarket. It could be seen that there were many people inside. It was completely different from the previous death-stricken highway. A middle-aged man enthusiastically welcomed Juan inside. This was the largest gathering place for survivors nearby. The supplies stored in the warehouse were enough for hundreds of people to last for several weeks. After enjoying a delicious meal for a long time, Juan did not mention the corpse he saw on the street. The faces of some people sitting facing away from the food became ugly. They had long heard that there were thugs operating around recently. They guessed that they might be prisoners who had escaped from prison. Juan felt disappointed after hearing this. He always felt that something was wrong. Meanwhile, the bald Lucas was chatting happily with a group of young people while talking about drinking. He was about to go find a bottle of wine to stir the atmosphere. After wandering around half of the supermarket, Lucas finally found his favorite item. He was about to take a few sips when there was a sudden noise at the back door of the supermarket. Early the next morning, a noise woke Juan up. He followed the crowd to the outside of the supermarket. He saw everyone looking up at the sky excitedly. The deadly snowstorm that lasted for many days has finally come to an end. The sun that had not been seen for a long time penetrated the clouds. The golden sunlight shone on the white snow. Pablo was the first to step out of the supermarket door. He took a breath of fresh air and turned back to smile at everyone. Everyone excitedly rushed out of the supermarket. Cheers echoed through the sky. Only Favali hurriedly took out his compass. He found that the direction of the table was now completely opposite. It was clear that this disaster was not over yet. At that moment, Anna suddenly spoke up to remind everyone and asked if they had seen Lucas. Juan and the others rushed to search the supermarket, but apart from an empty bottle of wine, they found nothing. Suddenly, a car rushed to the supermarket door. 3 masked and fully armed men jumped out. They did not say a word and directly attacked the survivors. When Juan heard the noise, he rushed over. The entire square was in chaos. The survivors fled like a swarm of bees. Elena trembled and told Juan that Clara was outside. Juan was aware that these 3 brutal men could threaten his daughter's safety, so he immediately switched to fighting mode. He continuously defeated 2 of them. The other had disappeared without a trace. Juan walked to the body of a robber and turned it over to see that it was a middle-aged woman with a gaunt face. There was a child's pendant around her neck. Juan felt strange. Why would a mother attack innocent civilians? At this time, the sound of a truck engine rang out from afar. Several military vehicles carrying soldiers stopped in front of the supermarket. Lucas, who had disappeared all night, suddenly appeared on a military vehicle. Soon after, all the survivors got on the vehicle and prepared to go with the army to Campo de Mayo. Juan and the others were very curious about Lucas's experience last night. He shook his head and said he didn't know. He had a few sips of wine at that time and then forgot everything. Lucas was woken up by the soldiers on the side of the road. Lucas knew they were from Campo de Mayo, so he took them to the supermarket. Juan felt uneasy after hearing this. He always felt that everything was strange, and what he didn't know was that in the tunnel, a few kilometers away, something even stranger was happening. The attacker had escaped. This man was walking calmly among the insects, as if he were a member of them. 3 days later, Juan and the group of survivors had settled in Campo de Mayo. Many young men volunteered to join the ranks of the fighters, hoping to contribute to the war against the insects. And most of the female survivors were assigned to the medical team. Favali was called to the command room by a soldier. In addition, the top commander knew from Lucas that Favali was very knowledgeable about electronics and mechanics. Coincidentally, there was an old radio in the base that needed professional personnel to operate. But Favali refused because of his poor health. Juan saw 2 close friends arguing in the square. Only then did Juan learn that the top commander had given Favali a mission. That was to ask Favali to go to the city center to install a radio. Only in that way could more survivors be gathered to take refuge in Campo de Mayo. But Favali knew how dangerous the city center was. Even sending an entire army would be like offering food to the insects. Lucas blamed Favali for being too stubborn. If the plan succeeded, they could save thousands of trapped people. At this moment, the siren from the tower circled back. Several military vehicles drove into the camp. In addition, they picked up a new group of survivors. Favali saw an old acquaintance, the old neighbor who had provided the RV. Only now, the other party's face was haggard and trembling. They said that all the neighbors were dead. Now, he was the only survivor. When night fell, some people quietly woke Juan up. They had escaped from the bell tower with Juan. Now they were considered comrades. Franco took the lead and went straight to the point. He hoped Juan could participate in the radio installation. He could drive a train. He had followed his grandfather to drive a train since he was a child. Everyone could take the train to the city center together. After a night of thinking, Juan finally convinced the anxious Favali. The two decided to join the radio installation. The next day, more than 20 volunteers said goodbye to their families and got on the boat and rowed down the river. On the way, they saw several transport planes tearing through the clouds, flying towards the city center. Everyone was relieved to see that scene because it proved that the army was organizing an effective counterattack. Humanity had not given up hope yet. Walking along the long road forward, they finally arrived at the abandoned train station. A group of people stayed outside to guard. The rest started the renovation work. They welded steel bars to the front of the train and installed heavy machine guns in the attack position. When everything was ready, everyone got on the train and ran out of the station. No one noticed that at the water tower in the distance, there was a woman in a coat, quietly observing everything. When the train gradually reached the city area, they saw that the long road ahead was blocked by abandoned cars. But everyone was prepared in advance. They tightened their seatbelts to brace themselves for the upcoming strong impact. The train kept accelerating with a roar. Everyone sang the national anthem in unison. The train was like an iron monster that swept through everything with terrifying force. The twisted pieces of metal flew everywhere. The train just kept tearing apart a road. When the smoke cleared, everyone couldn't help but raise their hands and cheer. They had finally broken through successfully. The train stopped at a few hundred meters away from the city center building. There was no road ahead. The volunteers could only walk. On the way, they saw a transport plane right next to them. They were very curious about how the insects that couldn't fly were shot down. After arriving at the target building, the commanding officer divided the team into 3 groups. The engineering group brought equipment to the rooftop to install a signal transmitter. The fighting group builds defense on the outer circle. In addition, they sent 4 people to check the transport plane they had just seen on the road. Juan looked around the eerily quiet city uneasily. They had broken into the city center in such a flamboyant manner, but they had not encountered any resistance from the insects. Could it be that the insects were planning a bigger plot? But to prove his guess, the 4-person team went on a reconnaissance mission by transport plane. They found several bombs with very high buoyancy in the hold, and the target of the attack of this plane from Peru was the famous River Plate Stadium. Just as the surprised person was about to attack, a young boy suddenly appeared in front of them. The reconnaissance team instinctively approached. Only then did they discover that there were dozens of fully armed soldiers standing on both sides of the long road. On this side, on the top floor of the Pavali building, the communication equipment had also been adjusted. The announcer took a deep breath and began broadcasting to the outside. Humanity is facing an unprecedented crisis. He called on all those living near Campo de Mayo to fight together against those disgusting insects. At Campo de Mayo, on the outskirts, the families who stayed behind picked up the signal on the radio. They immediately burst into thunderous cheers. Everyone hugged each other and cried as if they were about to see the dawn. After completing the broadcast settings, the technical team adjusted the transmitter to automatically repeat the broadcast every 5 minutes. Just as they were about to retreat, someone sneaked into the River Plate Stadium in the distance, emitting a strange blue light. Juan immediately found the commanding officer and asked him to send someone to investigate. But the officer looked troubled. The team sent to investigate the transport plane had not returned yet. They also did not have enough manpower. In the quiet of the night, Juan and a few friends sat around a small table playing cards. Lucas's behavior was very unusual. He was originally a master at playing cards, but now he even made mistakes in the most basic rules. When everyone was suspicious, Lucas suddenly jumped up. He grabbed a small knife and stabbed his friend in the stomach. Seeing Lucas trying to escape, Juan chased after him. Finally, Juan stopped Lucas on the rooftop. At this time, he was looking far away towards the stadium, emitting blue light, suddenly saying that his mission was completed. Before Juan could react, Lucas jumped out of the tall building. Looking down from above, they saw a long crowd of people gathering in this direction. The 3 people ran down the stairs in panic, but were surprised to see the fat man from the patrol team returning. As soon as they opened their mouths to ask, the fat fat man suddenly shouted. Then a large number of people rushed towards them. Juan and the others were scared and ran quickly towards the train station. With great difficulty, they got on the train. The group of more than 20 people before now had only 5 to 6 people left. Those people attacked them for no reason, just like robbers in a supermarket. They were about to return to their apartment to report the incident. Juan was planning to go see the Rioplat Stadium, which was emitting a strange green light. Perhaps the insects were plotting something. Surprisingly, Franco took the initiative to go with Juan. He then taught Favali how to drive a train. On the way to the stadium, Juan and Franco saw a scene that made people's hair stand on end. On the street, groups of people walked silently, like sleepwalkers. Some people held guns and shot unconsciously. What was even more unbelievable was that sometimes there were giant insects walking in the crowd. The two sides seemed to have reached some kind of tacit agreement. When the two of them reached the rooftop of the tall building next to the soccer field, the scene before their eyes made Juan suck in a cold breath. The stadium was filled with mixed formations of humans and insects. Juan recognized quite a few people, even his daughter among them. These people were like puppets facing the center of the stadium. They seemed to be waiting devoutly for a supreme being to appear. At this moment, Juan suddenly remembered that he seemed to have seen this scene before. What the hell is that? The enemy of humanity. As soon as Juan finished speaking, a giant hand with fingers stretched out from the blue light. With rhythmic movements, some people seemed to have received instructions to obediently leave, while the rest continued to stare at the mysterious existence in the blue light. At this moment, Juan finally remembered that all those insects were just the vanguard of some high-level civilization. They didn't need to go to war themselves. They just needed to throw the insects to blockade the city from afar. Then, through mind control of the survivors, they could easily conquer the Earth. And the so-called Campo de Mayo was actually a trap designed by the alien civilization. They even controlled the high-ranking military officers. In the name of the resistance, they called on the survivors to take refuge. Those who came would all become puppets of the alien race. Among them, Juan and Lucas's daughter had already been mentally controlled. As for Juan, the reason why he often appeared in fragments and felt very familiar with the scene before his eyes was because he was an eternal traveler. He has the ability to travel through the chaotic flow of time and space, constantly returning to the past. In the original story, Juan was completely defeated in the confrontation with the alien race. Everyone became controlled puppets. Only he survived. So Juan traveled to the beginning of the alien invasion. He tried to stop their rise. Unfortunately, the price of time travel was damaged memories. It seems that Juan's rescue plan this time had to end in failure. This is the entire content of the first season of The Eternal. Do you find this movie good? Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you again.